Alright, so I want to talk a little bit about this idea that we have of hunting and gathering and hunter-gatherer based societies. And apologies if this video isn't as thought out as some of the other ones. This might be a little bit more rambling. But hunter-gatherers, we think of this group of people who existed a long time ago, and then once farming came around, we stopped doing that, right? Hunting and gathering stopped once farming started, right? It's this sort of phase that we went through. And once farming shows up, we kind of get rid of it. And I don't know where I'm going to walk today, but we'll try to find some place. We might go behind some of these buildings. But anyway, hunter-gatherer societies, were this thing that we did, and then they disappeared once farming showed up. But hunting and gathering was really something that would have been done as recently as 150 years ago, even 100 years ago, in order to sort of supplement various parts of people's diets. So we don't really think about doing this now, but again, up until recently, people would have gone out into the fields and picked sort of wild onions, wild vegetables, wild fruits, flowers especially are edible, which we don't really think of these days, and eaten them as part of their meals. And that would have supplemented by gathering. You would have supplemented all kinds of your meals. You would have made them taste a lot better. You also would have made them less taxing on your own crops and your own stores and cans and things like that. And just sort of more interesting. And the thing about that is that we don't really do that anymore, so we think of it as kind of weird. But people a long time ago would have had a lot better idea of what was growing in the woods. They would have known how to identify things. They would have known what they could eat, what they couldn't eat. So there wouldn't really have been that risk that we associate with eating wild plants of, poisoning yourself or something like that. And hunting was also sort of similar. I'll go back this way, back the way I came, because there's people in that field. Well, I know who it is. It's the guy I work with, and he's taking the goats for a walk, but we'll go this way again. But people would have known what they could eat, what they couldn't eat, and they would have known what went well with all kinds of things: wild onions, wild potatoes, wild fruits and vegetables and flowers that you could eat and things like that. And again, they would have gathered it and added it to their meals. And something else is, again, hunting was also incredibly common. So people would have eaten a lot more wild, not just fruit, but wild animals, wild berries, which I just kind of walked under, wild fruits, and also foods, and also meat. So people would have eaten a lot bigger variety. We think of now, generally the only meat you eat is chicken, cow, pig, right? And occasionally turkey. But even something as common as sheep, people think of that as weird. If you were to serve somebody sheep or goat, they would think of it as weird. And then especially if you were to go out and hunt your own, say squirrel or rabbit or something, that would be incredibly weird. But again, a long time ago, that's what people would have done. And they would have eaten a lot more varied kinds of meat. They would have eaten a lot of birds, even things like pigeon, which don't take out of your head, the New York City kind of pigeon. Pigeons were a lot bigger, and they had a lot better diets than they do now. So eating pigeon isn't as gross as it sounds. But they would have eaten all kinds of different things that they would have gathered or hunted. And again, just because they farmed doesn't mean that they got all their food from the farm. They would have hunted a lot. They would have gotten a lot of wild berries, wild fruits, wild vegetables. And again, they would have hunted a lot more varied things than we hunt now. Even people who hunt really only hunt deer or maybe duck, but they don't hunt, wild turkey Really, they don't hunt a lot of different things that would have been incredibly commonplace 150 years ago. So, for example, we keep turkeys on our historic farm, but in reality, up until fairly recently, about 100 years ago, nobody would have kept turkeys. It would have been silly because turkeys just grew so naturally and were just so common. It would be like farming pigeons. Nowadays, we don't even think of it. This is the summer field for the sheep. It's growing in nicely. But we wouldn't even think of it just because of how common they are. And that's what turkeys would have been. But they would have hunted for all of those pretty constantly. And, we have this strange idea that people only ate what they would have farmed. But in reality, they really would have lived off the land in a much more sort of complete way. So again, wild fruit, wild vegetables, wild flowers, and of course hunting, and even fishing and things like that. So hunting and gathering wasn't just something that suddenly disappeared just because farming came about. People still hunted and gathered plenty, and if wild mushrooms even, although that wasn't as common in sort of English-based societies. The English have this sort of fear of mushrooms, which we sort of inherited, which mainland Europeans and most other people don't have. But anyway, you can look into this if you're interested. There's all kinds of books, field guides to wild edible plants, field guides to edible mushrooms and things like that. And it's really interesting because you really can find ways to basically feed yourself for free off of what you can gather. And that's how people would have, again, kept, especially during the summer, a lot of the stuff they would have farmed would have been kept for the winter. So during the summer, they would have sort of eaten off the land, eaten a lot of the wild fish, wild birds, wild plants. Whereas over the winter, you would have lived off your canned stuff and off of your livestock, butchering them or something like that. But yeah, so anyway, like I said, I don't know if that was as put together. I know I have a low standard for sort of organization here. I tend to just sort of ramble like this, but this might have been particularly rambly. But anyway, I think it's interesting to kind of look back. And again, you can find all these books about edible wild plants and things like that. And it's really interesting to see how much of our landscape, just sort of the weeds and stuff like that, dandelion is a huge one. Everybody thinks of that as a weed. You can, I believe, don't quote me on this, don't do this, I'm not responsible if you poison yourself, but I believe you can eat the entire dandelion plant. You can eat the flowers. I think you can make tea and stuff out of the leaves. So dandelion was an incredibly popular plant to eat, and there's all kinds of drinks and things like that based on dandelion. So again, if you're interested in that, find a book on it. I'm sure you can find some internet resources on it, and who knows, maybe if you're interested, go out and make a wild salad and feed your friends some wild onions and stuff like that. Just try not to poison them, but again, if you do a little bit of research, it's actually not that hard. So anyway, hope you learned something, and hope that wasn't too rambling, and I hope to catch you again soon.